Hello and welcome. You are listening to Embodied Curiosity. In this show, we will explore self-compassion and holistic health through the lens of embodiment, intuition, nature connection, and neuroscience. I'm your host, Micheala, and I'm so excited for you to join me. Welcome back to Embodied Curiosity. Today's episode is with my friend Keith from Elements Embodied. Keith is on a quest to be more fully human. This quest led him from the Great Lakes to Germany and then to the Pacific Northwest, where he is now feeling at home on the West Coast. A certified yoga teacher, a trained wilderness guide, and seasoned musician, Keith combines his unique talents and interests into immersive experiences that bring people into their whole selves, more aware, more connected, and more alive. Keith is passionate about the movement arts and experiencing the full range of motion in this human form. Through the interdisciplinary arts of music, movement, and the medicine of nature connection, he believes we can heal ourselves, our communities, and the natural world. In this episode, we catch up and discuss the big topic on everyone's mind, COVID-19. We are currently right in the middle of a global pandemic, and Keith and I discuss what has been coming up for us. We talk about our hopes for the future, ways we are feeling grateful, the silver linings that we may be experiencing. We discuss homesteading and nature connection. And finally, we dive into education reform, which is a shared interest of ours. Some of these topics are difficult to discuss, and it's a really challenging time for many right now. I see this episode as a snapshot of a time we will never forget, as our world is rapidly evolving and shifting. You can find out more about Keith on his website, elementsembodied.org, or follow along on his journey on Instagram at elements.embodied. Hi, Keith. Welcome to Embodied Curiosity. How's your day going?
Hey, Micheala. So good to be here. I am doing quite lovely, actually. I'm feeling very alive and centered and curious.
Nice. Yeah, I was wondering, normally I kind of go into talking about what you're curious about these days, but I actually want to start by just addressing, I guess, the elephant in the room, which is that we're in the middle of a global pandemic.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and that's part of why I'm even here is like the little bit of extra free time and home time is re-motivating and recommitting me to some of these kind of projects that get put aside, so that's one of the silver linings. But I've just been really curious to ask you, because I just always love your perspective on the myth and the magic and the world. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on what's going on, maybe just for you personally, or if you have any insights into the larger picture.
Yeah, it is the elephant in the room for sure. But it's almost like it's been actually a while with this elephant in the room, It's been like 3 weeks since some pretty final sort of decisions of the stay in place sort of things. And the social distancing has been in place for a month now. So it almost seems normal at this point, which is a bizarre thing to say because it is a very serious thing. And it is a global pandemic, by definition. And, but yeah, it's in my life, I sometimes have to re-presence that reality too. And obviously if you turn on the social media feeds and stuff, you are reminded, but yeah, often it's sort of in my personal experience, it's felt like Groundhog Day, but also completely different every day too. It's the container is the same. I have this sort of same, lack of being able to go public places and going to work as normal. So yeah, it's this weird like reset of like, okay, well, everything's the same, and yet it's different every day. And I'm recreating this, with this, it's a tabula rasa in a way, but there's still threads from the past that I can build on, like, trying to, take time to do the things that I want to do. And it's just been so interesting to like witness how different people relate to this sort of thing. Like, some people on the very extreme end of like the serious nature of it, and why aren't people taking it more serious? And then people who are skeptical of it, and then everywhere in between. And really it's just shining it beyond what is actually happening. Cause I sometimes I think we like to think we know what's happening because we're very well informed and there's a lot of information, but I think also like we have no idea what is truly happening. Even just in the nature that it's a microscopic thing too, that we can't see. So it's this unseen force and enemy that we're all, is shining, a light on all of our systems and relationships and way of being. So, yeah, I think time, it'll be interesting to look back on this years from now, and what truths came out and how we could have handled it better or worse, or, if I do believe we're always doing the best we can with the information we know at the time, but obviously that seems different for different people.
Yeah. Yeah, just for some context, I don't know when people will be listening to this, but it's Friday, April 3rd, 2020. And it just seems important to kind of state that because I look back at my journal over the last month and it's like insane the number of different phases and different ahas and different anxieties that have come up, and how every day is like, it's like a little microcosm, like you said, like nothing happens yet so much happens, I'm just looking at the numbers according to this one source that I look at sometimes. And today, right now, there's over 1 million cases in the world and almost 60,000 deaths. So that's what's happening right now. And it's interesting because we could have been here 2 weeks ago and those numbers would have been really different, and they could be really different in 2 weeks, So this is sort of a snapshot of where we're at now. Like you said, it's a month in. I actually realize it's almost exactly a month since my school decided to close and to go remote. So that was when it really hit hard for me. And even if I look at my journal, there was times in late February where I was having some major anxieties around it. So it is so true that even though, it's the elephant in the room, it's like the elephant's kind of been chilling for a while now, and it's very comfortable.
Yeah.
We're all just
definitely
used to looking at it, and different people, like you said, have different relationships with it and different kind of epiphanies around it. And it's almost like we're going through stages of grief or something around it. It's like denial and overwhelm and acceptance and numbness and all of it. So I agree with what you said completely. And something that really struck me was the Groundhog Day thing. Cause yeah, I really feel like every day I'm doing the same thing physically. Like I'm in the same place. I probably pretty much go on the same walk and kind of like we were talking about earlier, eat the same thing over and over again because I'm making both meals. So it feels like a lot on repeat in the body, but then in the mind and in the soul, even for me at least, I've been traveling far and wide within that structure.
Yeah, that's a really good point for sure. It's I think that is the dichotomy that I mean. Like the Groundhog Day is like physically I'm in the same space all the time. And I do go between here and the farm that I sort of, will live at in the future, but mostly am just working at. And it's cool because it's a safe space to work. I'm just working outside, mostly by myself or with the same people all the time. But yeah, I feel like a thought that crossed my mind was like that there's also this pervading paradox of like these two opposites being true at the same time. Like, like some things are so serious, all you can do is laugh. And, there's been some really relieving like comedy that has come out during this and memes like in real time.
Say the memes. The memes are just on point.
Yeah. And people have more time than ever to get creative and extract that, that sort of hilarity out of it. But yeah, it's very serious and it's like totally crazy. And yeah, and it's actually been around too. You mentioned the context, like it's April 3rd, but the first I heard, or the first case, I don't know that I heard of it right away, that entered America, and I think was in Seattle, was January 21st. Which is like, that's even a whole
long time ago. Yeah.
Month and a half beyond that too. So yeah. And that whole idea of exponential growth, and it just even that concept, I saw this graph of like, the amount of exponential growth graphs we've seen since January. And that in itself was an exponential growth because it's like,
so funny.
Yeah. These terms that have only been recently introduced, like social distancing and even quarantine and things of that nature, are like everyday vocabulary. And like you said, grief is a big theme throughout all of it, and I found it very interesting, in the symbology of like nature and the body and Eastern medicine and all that the meridian, this disease is obviously affecting the lungs, right? And it is the emotion that's associated with the lungs is grief. And that in that meridian through Chinese medicine. And I just find that, synchronistic or symbolic that obviously before this, one of the major global themes was like the rainforest burning and being cut down, obviously, throughout the years. And just in
Australia, the fires, that was crazy too.
Yeah, and like that, the lung chi of the whole planet, is very much in a traumatic state, and in capitalism is rushing, society is rushing so far ahead that it's hard to just stop and acknowledge that, and now that we've stopped, like a lot of things are coming to the surface. So yeah, there is that micro macro, that it's affecting individuals' lungs and also is a reflection of the lungs of the planet. And then viruses being a sort of actual metaphor for the Earth's immune system. So I think there's just in that mythic point of view, there's a lot of useful themes that are worth looking into and worth connecting the dots for sure.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that too. Like their differences to the situation that were really, really different. I think about like, obviously, this has prompted me to read about the Spanish flu in the early 1900s and realizing that actually really did impact young people and kids, and a lot of kids died and old people died too. But it's interesting to me. I mean, I don't know what it's saying or means, but it's interesting to think about how the meme or the metaphor of it only impacting the elderly and maybe the sick. And that isn't fully true because there's viral load and there's a lot of, information. But the large majority of people that are dying from this have pre-existing conditions or are elderly. And that seems to be an interesting thing. It's sad and horrible. And it says a lot about how we as a culture treat our elders, and that generation. And also our health. Like, I think that's the big thing that's coming up for me is like this, even though it's easy to see the virus as the enemy, in some ways, the disease, the lifestyle diseases almost are a big part of why this is impacting people a lot too. So that's like something that's hard to ignore. And in some ways that for me, like I have my own health stuff and it's been a really big direct motivator for me to take better care of my health. And my hope is that that's true for a lot of people that have dealt with health issues. It's like, it's easy to think like, oh, I'll deal with that later. Or, when it really gets bad, that's when I'll, clean up my lifestyle or whatever. But this is sort of it's not good. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying reminder to honor and take good care of this vessel, this body. So that's been coming up for me too, because it seems like, it definitely seems like it's impacting people more. Again, there's plenty of people that are taking the best care of their body. I just want to make that disclaimer, and that this still impacts. So I'm not trying to say it's anyone's fault, but it's at least for me personally, it's been a motivation to really take good care of my body.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to both speak personally from where you're coming from and speak to the average human, the average statistical human, which in a way doesn't exist, and is also
totally
like this such a big thing that it's hard for one human to fathom, because and that's part of what is hard about today and age is we're made aware of these massive concepts, from galaxies far, far away to just the nature of 8 billion people or however many are on the planet now. And then how do you live your life as one human, in your home and taking care of your vessel? And yeah, it's certainly an indictment. I don't even know what that word truly means, but an audit, I've heard it used, and so it sounds good in context. An audit of our resiliency, both personally and as systems. And clearly, a lot of things are not resilient enough, which is clear. Like nature is resilient at its core. It's able to withstand change. That's not to say that there's not like massive devastation that happens in the midst of that, and also on larger time scales, like glacial time scales and things of that nature. So it's hard for us humans who live on a certain timeline to process like these bigger sweeping things. But yeah, it's I find myself, I made a leap to move over to the Olympic Peninsula out of the city. And it's definitely been I don't even know how to frame it, right? Like using words like positive and good is like really hard in a global pandemic, but it's like, it's been reassuring to know that my life out here, and my priorities out here are largely the same. As far, and like, as it relates to the farm, my friends who are on the farm, like they live and work there every day. It hasn't changed their agenda. If anything, it's expedited it. You know what I mean? And so that's an interesting, it's a noticing, right? It's not good or bad. It's just like, well, noticing whose lives haven't changed as much or are more resilient to these external circumstances, and how can we learn from that and implement that more in more people's lives, right? It's not for everybody, but I imagine a lot of people are gleaning things from that, if they were on the fence of maybe doing farming or moving to the country now, or realizing how many things they can do remotely, and how much they prioritize their family or their health or their body over making money, so it's just like, there's all sorts of different ways you can value your life. And, you may be making a lot of money, but your health has been sacrificed, which leaves you vulnerable to certain things. And again, it's not a good or a bad thing, right? It's just like, well, it is. So what now?
Yeah, I love the focus on resiliency. That's so big. And yeah, this is exactly why I wanted to ask you about this, because, and I just want to make a plug for the farm that you're speaking of, which is White Lotus in Chimacum. And it's over on the Olympic Peninsula. And in particular, they have really been inspiring me, and it's already been a thing. Like, ever since I heard that they purchased the property, I was like, ooh, this feels like real. Like, this has been like kind of a fleeting dream for me, but to see someone just do it is such an expander and such a mind opener for me. And then in this situation, it's like, it's gone from like something in my 5 or 10 year plan to like, I have been watching videos on how to purchase property, and like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this like ASAP. And that, again, I can only speak for myself, but I fully agree that this is just like it gave me a little health wake up call. It gave me like a life wake up call. And like, I have these dreams and I have these goals and I have this vision for this life that I want. And I also try to stay grounded in the present and be like really grateful for what I have. And in a lot of ways, like, it's almost hard to admit this because I know so many people are suffering, but in a lot of ways, even the situation I'm in right now, even though I'm in the city, I have roommates, I have a really great, beautiful yard, a great neighborhood for walking. I have dogs, I have a partner. Like I am so blessed. In this situation, I'm able to work from home. I'm a teacher, so I can teach from home. And even though there's been a lot of fear and anxiety, and I'm supporting a lot of other people's fears and anxieties, it's actually been a pretty easy transition for me because of the way my life was already set up. But it makes me think like, how can it be even better? And I think of, your situation and the farm and how amazing it would feel to have a lot of my own food growing in my own yard, and to have the spaciousness and less noise, less pollution. I mean, even now in the city, it's like the air, I can actually tell the difference. The air feels way fresher and cleaner, and there's way less traffic. So you can just feel it. It's like I'm on a hike deep in nature. Like, it's that kind of air, and it's like in the city. So that's amazing. So I'm just like pointing out some silver linings with the full knowledge that like, this is a really, really hard situation for people. There's people that still have to work and that are in very scary, terrifying situations, like obviously healthcare workers, but definitely grocery store, restaurant, my mom works for FedEx, and it's every day, every day she has to stress about this. So I fully am there with those people and have full compassion. It's a really hard time. But again, in my own personal life, it's an interesting, what do you call it? Like juxtaposition to think about how just from the random roll of the dice or the random circumstances of the situation, how for some people, this is an easier transition, I guess is what I'm thinking. And I feel like I'm one of those people. I'm grateful.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we have to be able to mine the lessons out of this and the joy out of this. That's the Francis Weller philosophy of the ability to hold both grief in one hand and joy in the other, and to be able to move forward with them both. And sometimes there's time for just pure honesty or pure honoring of the grief and the tragedy, the sacred nature and the profane, the walking with sacred and profane. Everything is sacred and profane, it's both holy and divine and magical and real and tragic and finite. But in that respect too, it's like, I both feel privilege, like I acknowledged my insane amount of privilege that I've sort of inherited, based on
huge,
all these demographics that I represent, like a white passing cis male, like grew up in lower middle class type deal. But also like the things that I've earned too, the things that are in my life that aren't necessarily privileges. How do we acknowledge that too, that I've actually given up a lot. I've sacrificed a lot of financial, especially benefit, to live a more resilient and authentic to me and in touch with nature lifestyle. So that's for me what is really important, and what I see as my role in representing is that, I feel the same way, where like largely my, like, and granted, like I was able to save up money for this to withstand bills of that like imminent pressure and stress, which a lot of people are dealing with. But largely like my day to day, besides not going to my normal place of work, is actually largely the same, and the life that I want to live, really, which is like close to my home, investing in the land and the people around me, and not sort of traveling to extract money from something that I don't believe in. So like how do we both acknowledge our privilege and like sit in this place of like gratitude and perspective that there is a lot of hardship and a lot of people enduring things that I wouldn't wish upon anybody. And also like, what are the choices that put us in these positions? And how can we move forward acknowledging that, we may have to give up financial incentives in order to have more resiliency and more embodied presence and health. And like, it's like you can't have 100% in all your categories. You can't be like the richest person in the world and have all the best relationships and have the healthiest body and have like the best garden, like, so
maybe
if you pay people to do that. Like, and it's,
but I hear you. It's like you have to make sacrifices and trade-offs for the life you want to live. And in order to even know the life you want to live, you have to have that space to even contemplate that, so totally. In some ways, what I'm hoping, best case scenario is that if people can find a way to be supported, which hopefully that is happening with the new government stuff. I don't know how I feel about all that, but the point is, if I'm an individual who is out of work and is now hopefully getting support through unemployment, and that this is actually just going to be a time of a little bit more scarcity, but a lot more time and space, then the positive aspect of that is finally having the time to reflect on what you want your life to look like. And that in itself is like, gives me chills to think that possibly millions of people are in that situation right now. And I'm grateful for that. I feel like, so I'm a teacher, so I have summers off, and I've worked most of the summers actually, but the last couple summers I've mostly taken off. And man, speaking of privilege, just wow. It's such a gift. And, I've done the work in those summers. Like, I've gone so deep into, I have so much farther to go, but I've tried to go so deep into, my intuition and into my soul calling and my purpose, and just all of the getting to know myself, self-love, all of it. And I realized I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was working full-time all year. So I just think, like, wow, what a world, what would the world look like if everyone had that? 3 months, be with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So how, like, again, it feels like we have to make disclaimers in order to talk about the gifts within this, but like, assume, just again, which is why I like to make agreements with people and have sort of assumptions of, like, with people, so we can get into those nuanced topics and those fruitful topics of, so making those disclaimers of, like, non-judgment and unconditional love and gratitude and privilege and perspective, and then move forward into that nuance of, like, this is a gift, it's, again, it's whatever you want to make of it. So, it really is. And obviously people are, again, it's so nuanced. So it's like, even saying that, I acknowledge where it's how is it not a gift, but where
maybe it's better to say it has the potential for gifts. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I know what you mean. It's a really hard topic to discuss, and, like, you're catching me on a particularly positive day where I finally got a good night's sleep. If you would have talked to me yesterday, I would be like, how dare you say it's a gift, So it's we all have our own ebbs and flows with how positive we can be about it. Yeah,
and again, like you said, all, like, the most fruitful lessons to be learned are often in the midst of the most chaos or the most uncertainty or the most sadness and tragedy. And like, in a way, I've wished for society to be able to just put a collective pause and be like, what are we doing? Because most of us don't. We don't know. We've just inherited. And, and I've spent a large part of my 20s, like, sort of putting myself in those liminal spaces and giving up security and giving up certainty in order so that I could explore my the traumas, both in my life personally, of, like, that I've experienced in my lifetime, and then also the traumas of my lineage, of my personal lineage, but then also, like, the traumas of our society, and how we came to be. And so where's the space to acknowledge those past traumas too? Because I feel like if we don't acknowledge those past traumas, they circle back around and become, so that's where there's a lot of space for learning. I mean, like, I haven't acknowledged, I'm a teacher as well. Like, and I teach because I love to learn, and if we're not learning from this, I don't know what else to, like, what else to, like, how is this a gift? It's because it's an opportunity to acknowledge your privilege, or to acknowledge things that you left, stones you left unturned, or relationships you left untended, or systems that you want to reimagine, you know, like there's a lot of really good systems out there that are looking to be implemented, but the ones that are in place right now are so concrete, so unwilling to change that, you know, it goes back to like the Chinese symbol of chaos is opportunity, because when there's too much order, there's no opportunity to evolve or change. So, and there's fact is there's always chaos happening. It just so happens that there's a lot more right now, which everything works in pairs. The more chaos there is, the more opportunity there is for pairs, and that's not my more opportunity there is for change, and so that's not my opinion. That's just the reality.
Yeah, I love that. That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, another perspective I was thinking while you were talking about the gifts is like, you know, for example, this could be shedding a light for people on some kind of political issue, right? That isn't a stone left unturned, or it isn't their fault in any way, but like somehow people may be feeling really, really, really angry, you know, about things. And you could say the same thing about the anger you feel. It's like it had to get so bad for it to be a strong enough force of anger for, you know, something to really shift, or for people to really stand up and fight for it. So that's another possible gift in the challenge, you know, too, is that something had to be pushed to the extreme almost. And there's so much unveiling of just, yeah, like you've been saying, the fragility of our systems. It's becoming more clear to people who didn't want to see it before, you know. And we'll see.
Exactly.
We'll fast forward. We inherited some craziness.
Yeah, we're so much of what we are working within are what was not our choice. You know, so it's always a choice. So and this is a pivoting point, you know, there's always these black swans, as it were, that are sort of unpredictable, but inevitable, means that you cannot avoid them, that challenge the integrity of these systems. So again, it's a tragedy by every sense of the definition. And how are we, I think what would compound the tragedy is by returning to exactly how things were before, or pretending that we can return to how things were before. Because the fact is we cannot return to the past, right? Can't go back. I don't know why. I get the sense of like returning normal in the sense of like mitigating chaos and death and helping people have a sense of stability. But I don't resonate with the idea of returning to normal in the sense of like, well, if only things were how they were before this, you know, this is that opportunity to be like, do we actually believe in this, or do we want to do something different?
Unfortunately, your thing kind of froze for a second there, but I think I got the gist of what you're saying. I don't know. It might be an internet thing. The last thing I want to say on that is just, I keep thinking the word uncertainty keeps coming up, and it's like the big thing that I see kind of as a thread throughout is this like inherited sense of certainty, and I think this has already been crumbling for a little, probably a little while before all of this, but it's the looking straight in the face of uncertainty and realizing that that's all there ever was, you know, and that the illusion of certainty was never real. And so even though it felt safe, I mean, we just don't know. We don't know, like you said in the very beginning, we don't know what's happening. We don't know who to listen to. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or later today, you know. it'll be interesting to come back to this conversation in a month and see what's developed.
Yeah.
So I'm trying my goal, and again, this isn't advice, but at least for me, I'm really trying to make friends with uncertainty, almost like thinking of it as like a playful entity that I'm just observing as it creates the future, or doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and it always comes back to gratitude and perspective, as well as like the healing agents, that no matter what, help you find a place of grounding. No matter what it is, grateful for the problems that I have, grateful for the chance to contribute to this, and that like everyone's work is different too. Sometimes I feel like there's a sense of guilt, right? And thinking of like how a lot of people, like healthcare workers especially, are just on the front lines, and they're contributing and dealing with, hazards and risking their health for the greater good. And I'm like, well, who am I to be enjoying any part of this? But I feel like we need those people. We need the meditating monks on the mountain to hold that space so that there's something joyful to come back to. And for me, that's a lot of that is in education, is in sort of contributing to reimagining our education systems. But also a large part of that is tending to the more than human world and creating a resilient piece of land where people can come in the future to heal and be in connection with themselves. So, and that's a sort of like, I would say, like, what kind of garden are you growing, and what kind of crop are you hoping to get out of it? Are you trying to grow radishes, which are ready in 30 days? Which we all need to do. We need that short-term fruit to keep us going. But also I'm working on a lot of things that are like the orchard approach, where it's like I may not actually see any return on my work for 3 to 5 years in planting an apple tree, which will not fruit for 3 to 5 years. But with the vision that in 5 years I'll have more fruit than I could possibly deal with, and we'll be able to spread it. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, on that, I would love to transition to like, within the realm of what's happening right now, but in general, I feel like you and I have a lot of aligned philosophies on education and education reform, and we could probably have a whole nother episode on this, but I would love to hear, like, what are some current things you're thinking about around education reform, around what kids really need right now? Another big question. Yeah, such a big question, but a worthy one, worthy of approaching with resilience and with thoughtfulness, for sure. You're right, and that question's going to change based on the developmental level of the kids. What do kids need? What do our tweens need? What do our adolescents need? Those are all, nuanced in their own way. But I think like a big picture thing is, again, like this quote of, or reference of, like, education is not solely to prepare people for life, but actually education is life itself. It's happening right now, and so I think we all, as a society, it seems we have that priority, is that, like we need to prepare ourselves for this uncertain future, which is sort of ironic, because actually in a way that's not what we do at all, because our systems are so fragile that they're not
they're preparing for the past more than the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it really is preparing for the past. I just think, yeah, it's, oh man, there's so many thoughts I have on the matter.
Big question. Yeah.
No apologies. It's worth approaching, and I know we agree on so many of these things well, again, I like to approach it too from like, when we talk about if we're going to talk about education, like first we need to establish like what we're talking about. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, that's how I'm, it's sort of like tedious to a point, or like semantics sometimes, but like, okay, when I talk to you about education, I sort of have an idea of what you mean by education. But if I talk to just some random person about education, we may be speaking about two different things.
Totally.
So I truly believe, like Michael Mead, who's, someone I've worked with for a while and is I consider a mentor of mine, is he, local, just amazing author.
If anyone wants like a really awesome perspective on the coronavirus situation, I mean, the little bit I've heard, I haven't listened to all of them, but he has a few episodes from the last couple of weeks on his podcast. Yeah,
it's so funny. I've like worked with his material so much over the years, and just like feel like I see the world through his eyes almost, in a way that I actually have not listened to any of the podcasts, but I can already imagine what he's talking about.
Really great mythic archetype stories around it. Anyway, you were saying.
Well, and I've listened to his podcast a ton. And again, what I hear him speaking through me in that answer to the question is like, educare means to lead out, to like unravel, to that from within, like a flower blooming, sort of learning, sort of growing. Whereas oftentimes I think that gets confused with instruction, which is to pack it in. So it's like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, sort of, and there's a place for instruction too, like following directions and like learning about certain systems. You got to learn the rules to break them. I believe to a certain extent, but also, that's a way to address like the average child and like hundreds and millions of children. Often it's sort of the easiest way is to create something that sort of homogenizes them. But then to me, education is very personal and very individualized. And every person you add to the equation is not a linear sort of thing, like, I'm teaching one kid, I'm educating one kid, or I'm educating two, and now I'm educating 20. It's like, for me, that's exponential. It's like geometry. When I'm speaking one-on-one, that's a whole different paradigm than when I have even one other person in the room, let alone 10. And for me, 10's a lot, but most people in the public school system are dealing with like 20 completely unique souls that have different destinies.
30 to 40 too is usually.
Oh my God. I don't even, that gives me a headache just thinking about. And that's just not how I work either.
Yeah, I agree. I think like all the different levels are like little fractals of complexity for sure, because you could go so deep with one person, and then to try and hold that amount of space for 10 people is like really impossible for someone to do. So it just takes a different perspective, and then the learning is less about that individual and more about group work and collective and experience and community, which is also really valuable. But I agree, it's a lot. I think the average class size is like 30 to 35.
Oh my God, if that's the average, we got some serious problems going on.
Class size is a really hard thing.
Yeah, and like, how do we...
What you're saying... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, like, sort of referencing back to what we were talking about, a thought that crossed my mind is like, how do we value these things? If we say we value education, but we tend to put a value in the society pretty strongly on money, then I would argue that we don't value it very much. The market doesn't value it, at least. right? We may personally or like in theory value education, but that is not reflected in the amount of money that people earn. And again, it's like, because what I'm referencing earlier was like, who is on the front lines? We got healthcare workers and grocery people, which are in a way two completely different worlds. And obviously healthcare workers have way more training and are in way more of a hazard thing. But at least they're getting paid, at least somewhat in a proportionate way to reflect that. Whereas grocery workers is often considered like an unskilled position, but it's so crucial and important, and so it's interesting to just acknowledge that they're in a way at risk of a lot of vectors, right? Uncountable numbers of vectors of possibilities of infection or transmission. And yet most of them luckily in Seattle, most of them are probably getting $15 an hour. But I imagine people in the, what is the federal minimum wage is $7.25, definitely.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And so I could only imagine like having that much risk, and only being compensated that much. I think that would mess with my psychology a lot.
It's really hard right now. Yeah. And like, anyway, you were saying about education and yeah, it's almost like a joke at this point where people just know that teachers don't get paid that well. So it's an interesting thing too, because it's a similar thing where how important are they to the world and to the future of our species? Yet, they're not. Yeah. It's not reflected in the numbers very much, but there's been some improvement on that a little bit in our state, but hasn't impacted definitely, us little alternative school people as much. But anyway, this education topic has been coming up a lot because it's just like crazy to believe that like, I mean, I think it's great that they should close schools because we had school while this was kind of going on, and it was like, yeah, kids can definitely spread this thing real quick. But it's interesting to be following, and there's a lot of like confusing information on what's going on, but to be following what's happening right now, like even just in our state, but I imagine in our whole country and in the whole world, there are millions of kids not in school right now and missing months of school, and they're doing their very best to try and keep up by doing the internet thing. But we had to basically invent that overnight. In my school, we have such a small population of students that we're like a more agile little speedboat versus like the cruise ship that is, the whole state of Washington. It's hard to change course so quickly. And so I really feel for those teachers and having to learn all new systems and then to also have to work within the crazy, insane, strict standards that are being imposed upon every school in this country. And anyway, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I hear rumors, maybe they're not going to have to make up all those days. Like maybe they're not going to be forcing everyone to keep up with their daily curriculum. It's a crazy thing, but what I'm hoping, and this is again where my opinion comes in, I'm hoping that we realize that there's this meme going around. I'm just going to use this to illustrate my point of the Titanic sinking. Have you seen that one? The Titanic sinking, and then there's like the guys playing the violin and trying to make everyone feel good. And then there's a meme that says this is like what teachers are right now. It's like this, we're trying to pretend like everything's normal as the ship sinks, and it's totally just a joke. And I mean it with full 100% massive respect for what teachers are trying to do. But it does feel, for me personally, it feels pointless to try and stuff learning down kids' throats right now. Like the reality is, from a psychology perspective, there's a lot of kids in a complete trauma space right now and are having so many fears come up and so much uncertainty and so much change and people dying. And it's so crazy for kids that can't really conceptualize this, that like the thought that we're forcing kids to try and memorize a bunch of random facts that they can always just Google later, it just blows my mind. So I just want to point that out around education. Like, it just feels like it would be best if we could kind of relax a bit on the standards during this time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like, for context, like we teach in environments, and especially I teach in a very non-standard environment where I'm mostly outside, in nature, with very little hard-lined curriculum, in the sense of like, yeah, there's going to be a test on this, or like I have expectations. I'm more of the 50-50 principle. Like, I have a plan, and then if half of it happens, cool. But I expect half of it to be completely emergent, and I want it to be emergent. But yeah, like I sort of had to like use my imagination to put myself in that, like basically when I was a kid, like imagining myself in public school right now, like what I was being taught and how I was being taught, right, in that sort of memorizing sort of way, and just like imagining that still happening. And I was like, wait, does that still happen? Because I'm so far removed from it. And so, yeah, I'd be interested to talk with people who are in the more standard and be like, so what is actually the is it still like, are you still memorizing facts? Like, especially from home, where it's like even more obvious that this is like not relevant to my experience right now. Like, yeah, can we learn coping skills and learn, life skills that are relevant and spacious, and just spend time with our family without actually having to really be accountable to learning in the traditional sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want to echo what you said. Like, my school, we use a loophole in the system a little, which is that all the kids register as homeschoolers. And so we don't have to worry about these standards and number of days a year and certain learning targets. I mean, but I was trained as a public school teacher, and every single day there's a long list of requirements for every single class. So missing one day is a big deal. And that's why they add it to the end of the year. And so I can't imagine what it would be like. I mean, I also want to talk to a teacher and hear their perspective, because it's so much to expect that to stay the same. It's just so much work. 2 months. It's been a month. It's going to be 2 months at least. It'll probably be till the end of the year, and I don't even know after that. But just to expect that much to happen, I've still been teaching online, and I teach math and science mostly. And I said from the beginning to my kids, and this is my administration is in full support of this. Like, my number one priority for you guys is your mental health and like your well-being. And I am only here to provide opportunities for doing something that might help you feel some normalcy. It's like, again, it's like the people on the Titanic playing the violin. Like, I'm still assigning math problems and practice and giving, explanations, and I'm still trying to go about the class, but I make it really clear to them that like they need to look inside and assess, is this making me feel better or worse? Is this supporting my mental health right now, or is this making me suffer more? And I will say it to them every time that that's my number one priority. And I wish that the education system could be that flexible, because for some kids, I want to just point out that like I have students who really want to be continuing on, and who, whether it's that they love math or they just want something that feels normal, or they just want something to take their mind off stuff, like they're stoked to try different technologies and to like figure out new ways to learn, and they really like learning, some of them. So I'm not suggesting that we don't give kids opportunities to learn or don't teach them anything, but it's just interesting to think about, yeah, like you said, thinking back to when I was a kid and the paradigm I was in when I was in school was like, this is life or death. Like, I need to do this work. I need to do well in this test. Like, I'm going to literally be completely jobless and homeless and die if I don't get an A. You know, like, that's how I felt. And that's the paradigm they're in. And it's like, what must be going through their minds now that there's no school? And yet they're being expected, and some of them, to still be keeping this up in their own way. I don't know. It's just a lot. That's a world of anxiety, I'm sure, for the people in that world. But I'm hoping that the being home and being together is giving some respite from that, giving some comfort.
And what you said is so beautiful and is so relevant, you know, to this very specific time that we're in, you know. And so, you know, it's almost like, what you said, like, you know, but what you said, I feel like, should be the standard, not the exception, you know, about like, is this my top priority is your mental health, you know, is the health of your whole being. And that is actually my standard, global pandemic or not, actually, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, like,
of course.
So
Just
it's
continues.
almost like, so it like totally makes sense that you like say that in this circumstance, and like people for whom that's not the norm, they have sort of like compassion for that right now. But like, I wonder, someone for whom that is not the standard, like, would they be like, how can you hear that and say that shouldn't be the norm all the time? Because you're essentially saying, by that not being the standard, that actually I am willing to push forth my agenda regardless of your mental health. You know, and when you say it like that so bluntly, that's like a sort of obvious, like, whoa, well, not that. But then you're like, wait, but isn't that what's happening? Because like you said, there's no difference in your psychology when you're threatened, whether it's a real threat, like a physical threat of death or pain, versus like a perceived threat, you know? And so that idea of failing or disappointing does actually have physiological and psychological detriment to the individual, aka trauma, you know, like too much too soon. And it's like, wait, okay, but we're talking about this as the norm. So it's normal to be traumatized into succeeding by some sort of standard that I don't agree with in the first place, and that doesn't even seem to be relevant to a large extent anymore.
I'm clapping. That's pretty much sums it up for me. Again, like, I feel like, wow, we could go on, because that just makes me want to riff off that and just talk about, exactly, like, what the perspective is. Probably, if I don't make them do it, you know, then it's kind of like a tough love perspective. Like, they are going to suffer because now, so that they can be happy later and get a job and blah, 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 and be a part of society. And I have lots of thoughts on that. But that is the paradigm. And honestly, like, I have a lot of complaints and critiques of the system. I think there's better ways, but I also just want to admit that I haven't come up with a viable solution, you know? So I just want to kind of highlight that as, like, I see a lot of ways it can improve in little ways. And I think the puzzle is that we have so many kids and so it's like, there isn't a model that fits everybody. And so that's why there isn't a solution. And there, you know, so it's like, there's some philosophical kind of shifts that we can make. Like, you know, I've gone to a lot of different progressive educator kind of workshops and conferences, and I've learned a lot about how we can think differently and how we can push this to get better and better. And that's kind of all we can hope for right now. It feels like I feel like, again, it's like the cruise ship. It's so hard to change course when this is how it's been. But anyway, this is an opportunity to really, again, just like we were reflecting on our health and our lifestyle, this is a good time for people to reflect on education and how it can be done differently, because we're proving right now that it can be done differently, because we're doing it differently because we have to,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important thing to acknowledge, of just being like, there's no prescription for everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the point, is because, and that's that's my issue with the system, is that we're sort of pretending that there is a prescription for everybody, or that everyone has this goal of being like academically successful to be a professor, because that's how school is designed, Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a professor or go get your master's or your PhD, like, it's designed from the time you're in kindergarten to basically, with that being the end goal. But we obviously know that that's not the goal or the reality for most people. And so how do we also have a beginner's mind and approach it from a way as like, what can I do? Like, think global, act local kind of deal. Mm-hmm. Like, how can I make an impact and nurture the relationships around me and be an example for other people? It's, again, I'm not here to convince anyone that they shouldn't go to public school, or that public schools are not doing their best, because they are.
They really are.
I have so much empathy, and that's the reason why I want to continue to connect with you, because we've sort of had the privilege and taken the time to step outside of that paradigm. And so we can add perspective that can help shift the cruise ship away from the glacier, and play a violin while we're doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like we're creating the hopeful story, because I think there's a lot of this is based on these kind of preconceived notions on what human nature is. Like, humans don't like learning, and humans need punishments and rewards, and humans need da-da-da-da-da. But it's like we're basing that off of the last 150 years that school has existed. And so how do we even know what human nature is anymore? And the only way you can really even know it is to see what's happening in systems where that isn't the case. And that's like places like my school, or like the systems that you're checking out, like any alternative education system or homeschooling or unschooling, really gives you a pause and makes you think differently about what we assume is human nature around learning. And yeah, I'm just continuously amazed. Like, I would have been skeptical too, hearing all this, but like when you see it with your own eyes, I mean, I've been in this system for 12 years now, and I've just seen countless numbers of kids, regain their passion for learning, or follow their own path and be successful. And it's not what we think of as success, maybe, but it is still successful. And if you change what like I was saying before, like what your end goal is, instead of your end goal being A's and prestigious college or some kind of job with some kind of income, like, why don't we think a little bit more about the whole person is kind of the theme here. And having our goals be more aligned with what we want for our kids, actually.
Yeah. And on a sort of like concluding, summarizing viewpoint, like my philosophy on education is that no matter what you do in your life, no matter who you become down the line or what your profession is, you always need to learn what I used to think of as two different things, and then I've since evolved into a third, right? But my foundational educational philosophy is that you need to learn how to manage your resources, which is your time, your energy, your community, your raw materials, money, et cetera, et cetera. It could be hard and fast, tangible resources, or mental resources, emotional resources. You need to know how to manage those resources, and then need to know how to create value from them. Like I have all these raw materials, but if I don't know how to create value from them, then they're not worth as much to me or as to someone else. So how do we manage resources and create value from those resources? And then even if you can create value from resources, you need to be able to communicate that value, or at least have someone who can communicate it for you, which is essentially what marketing is, is like being able to tell the story of why what you have is valuable. So like that distills it down for me. And I don't think that our school systems are designed with those principles in mind.
I love that. Wow.
And so much of the world is like, well, first I'll understand the world in my head and theoretically and through someone else's eyes, and then I'll experience it in my world. Whereas actually, I believe it's the opposite. We can see theories and we can use those to apply to our lives, because obviously, clearly people have figured out things that are useful. But ultimately, we need to do what's best for our physical body, which is that we need to have regular bowel movements. We need to eat nourishing food. We need to lubricate our joints. And it reminded me of this Buddhism calendar quote, which is like, Buddhism has no room for special effort. Just be ordinary and nothing special. Eat and drink and move your bowels and pass water. And when you're tired, go to sleep. Fools will find me ridiculous, but the wise will understand.
I love that. Wow.
Yeah, and I've just been riffing
Bringing it
on
back. Embodiment.
Yeah, and to me, the body of the earth is the soil, and if we're not regularly in contact or in relationship with the soil, we are fundamentally disembodied. And that often shows up for food for most people. And yeah, some summarizing thoughts too. I keep coming back to the Bill Mollison, who's the founder of permaculture, which is, although the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple.
Seriously. They're like right in front of us, right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So
I love his work. Yeah.
And he's a white man who essentially distilled down a lot of indigenous practices. So, it's good to presence that lineage, that he is an incredible human and did a lot to bring that into the mainstream and put it through the eyes of science and system thinking. But like this is not necessarily something we need to learn how to do. We need to remember, like our indigenous ancestors, all of us did agroforestry, where we're making, working with nature to make it more resilient and to create abundance. And to get more energy out of it than we're actually putting into it. Whereas we have the inverse. We are burning millions of years worth of sunlight in order to go throughout our days. And that is the fundamental disconnect I see, is that we're living in a disproportionate relationship to how much one human can actually do in one day without fossil fuels, without stored up sunlight. And that when we come into more of that relationship of what one person can do in their body with their body, I think, we have this perverted relationship with time, whereas John O'Donohue would say that time is the mother of presence, and that we can live in harmony with the original time of seasons, cycles, spirals, the moon, instead of being subject to it and oppressed by it. So yeah, stress, as he would say, like the the dirty kind of stress, the ugly kind of stress, he would say is a perverted relationship with time. So bringing it back, like, we're using time as a measurement, and we're going to wrap up this conversation because we realize, like, we've given it enough time, and we've made agreements with time and other things in our lives. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's good to know when to move on as well.
Yeah. Oh, the time topic. We could go far with that, but I love the presence. I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely have felt the effects of presence on time and the dilation of time through that. And I mean, this is part of why I, love the podcast format, is I think, I'm not really concerned about, necessarily how long or short, but it's cool to have a format that's audio that people can just take it in on more of a slow pace, because I feel like things just are getting faster and faster. Like, I even notice it in myself, like how it's like easy to just like go to YouTube and turn it on double speed and just like try to consume like so much in such a small amount of time. And that is like how social media feels. It's like you're flipping through this like news feed and it's just constant tiny clips and even stories. Like, I think like a lot of people just like click through stories on Instagram and like don't wait till the end of the 15-second story, So, and I do the same thing. So I really appreciate the format of podcasts. I mean, like, some people do like 3 or 4 hour podcasts, and it's like awesome, because that's like normal. I mean, I think conversations are just so rich and so great that they could go on a while. I think the hardest part is bringing it back to the body, is like sitting for this long, probably.
Totally.
But I'm super glad to have like covered, the current state of the world, and riffed a little on education. I really do like strongly desire a entire episode on education. And I know we could go so deep into the philosophical and ancestral and mythical realms around that. And I hope we planted a seed in some listeners on some of our radical ideas around that, prioritizing the well-being and the bodily well-being, especially. I mean, speaking of sitting in chairs, like, kids have to sit in chairs all day for 7 hours, and you don't even want to know some of the stories I've heard of bathroom passes and the limits on taking care of your body. It's so appalling to me and sad, but I think we're aligned on that as well. Embodiment and being encouraged to listen to your body, like when you have to go to the bathroom or when you have to stand up and move around. That's like such a huge missing piece from everything, and it's almost like it's borderline a conspiracy, because like the culture, the society is set up so well for people to not move. I just want to like give that some space, some thought, because I know
movement ecology,
but our system, it's the priority is efficiency and the minimum amount of effort. And I love, just to plug another amazing human in this world that we both know of, Katie Bowman's work on movement and just outsourcing movement like that. If we could go on and on, but that is a whole nother deep dive if anyone wants to look into her work. She's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm super grateful that you were able to hang out today and we got to catch up. This is an important friend catch up too that everyone gets to witness, because I've been wanting to see how you're doing. And this is extra special when we can't see each other. You normally hear visiting us on Mondays, and we've missed your face. We've missed your face. George and Nala, say hi.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely, that's, we've had to give up things, and that's definitely, been experiencing grief myself around that, as much as I'm truly embracing this as much as possible. And it sort of lends itself to my current goals, this whole scenario of like working on the farm and working with the land, and building a tiny home, building equity in my life, and working on projects like podcasting and writing. It does lend, the circumstances of not being able to go out sort of lends itself. I mean, every great writer goes to the cabin in the woods and holes themselves up. Even music artists do the same thing, you know, because it's a requirement to get these things done. So it lends itself to that. But it also comes with the sacrifices of, seeing my family and my friend family. I was supposed to be leaving pretty soon to go to Austin, Texas to see my oldest brother. And so, or inviting my parents out, but also seeing my actual flesh and blood brother who lives with you, which is such a gift that I get to see and work with him every week. And then also who I consider you like my family. By every stretch. I'm not shy to say that, not just in the length of time that I've known you, but, so it's an ongoing conversation, and that's partly the deal with what like you said, I'm excited to go into education and go deep on it, but also to respond to it in real time and to continue to work with it instead of, I think that's sort of the flaw of public schools, is that they've like thought of a prescription and a system that they hope will never have to change, when in fact, like, actually that is the problem, is that the world is a vastly different place than it was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's exponential. It's not linear. And we're all feeling the weight of how fast things can change with exponential growth. But it's always happening. You made me think of, I think this was from the Charles Eisenstein article, but there's this quote that maybe we can even end with that, and I think this is where I heard it. I wrote it down just because it was something I read recently. It said, it's Lao Tzu. Is that how you say his name? Men are born soft and supple, dead. They are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. What you said about education made me think of that. And just this ongoing conversation is like, it's the conversation itself is alive and will continue to flow, and thus is uncertainty. Things are not dead quite yet. Yeah, that reminded me of this quote, this educational consultant named Tom Herrick. He goes, 21st century kids are being taught by 20th century adults using 19th century curriculum and techniques on an 18th century calendar.
Oh my God. It's so good. There's so many good quotes.
So deep.
Hey, well, can you tell me where, I'm sure people are going to be like, who's this guy and where can I hear more from him? Could you tell me where we could find you? Like where you'll be posting and writing and doing what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Physically at the moment, I'm on the Olympic Peninsula, normally tending a garden of a homeschooled co-op in the Seattle area. But I am mostly here and plan on being here in the Olympic Peninsula, working with White Lotus Farm and Inn, Cedar Root School, which is a sort of subset of the Wilderness Awareness School. But yeah, online platforms currently under the avatar Elements Embodied, working with nature connection and these fundamental principles of life. So at Elements Embodied on Instagram, elementsembodied.org is the website I'm working on.
Nice.
And yeah, just cool. trying to make things available, YouTube, podcasting, all all, what is that? All the, I don't even know, but
Channels.
On the internet, in and around the internet.
All the different channels. Yeah, little streams. Yeah, I'm super grateful for your perspective. So I'm glad. I want to keep encouraging you. I know you and I, we both probably have little bits of hesitation or imposter syndrome or all the things that hold us back from really fully sharing. And I just want us to co-encourage each other to continue sharing. And the people that will get something from what we have to say will find us in their own special way, just like they have in this moment. And I will write all of that, all of those details down in the show notes so that people can find the spelling and such.
Yeah,
cool.
Totally.
Can't wait to check it out some more.
Yeah. Well, happy Friday. Sometimes I forget what day of the week it is right now. It's just day. It's just
Same.
The day of the week.
Yeah. Another day.
Another day. And so sending, health and healing and grounding to anyone who needs it, aka all of us, and especially those who are feeling disembodied or overwhelmed, and the earth.
Thank you, Earth, for holding us.
Thank you, Earth.
This.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you. You are a blessing on this earth, and grateful for you.
Thank you for listening to Embodied Curiosity. I hope you picked up some valuable insights to inspire you to stay curious and embodied.